You've investigated the desktop bridge, and you realize you finally have an opportunity to take advantage of the Windows Store and all the things that it has to bring. But how do you do it? Where do you start? What do you do from now? Well, this is part 2 of talking about the desktop bridge, where we get into the nitty-gritty of things you need to consider inside your application and be ready to be amazed at how little change you need to be able to qualify and get your app into the store tomorrow. That's this episode of Dev Radio. Okay, let's step back a little. I've kind of felt it out. My calculator is a pretty good candidate. It's a very small set of changes I have to make, maybe none at all, to be honest. And at the same time, I'm ready now to kind of go through the process. When a developer comes to you and says, I'm ready to try out the desktop bridge, what's step 1?
Step 1 is to fill out a form. We have a website where you can basically register for the program, where you provide just a few pieces of information about your name and your company and your website, and that's about it. And
now wait. I want to help out the listener here. We'll put this in the description as well. So step number 1 is to put your name on a list, so that you can get permission to have this type of application. Can you imagine if just anybody could submit a full trust application to the store? It'd be chaos and nightmare. So step 1 is to get on that list. Where is that list? I have the URL. It's HTTP, aka.ms, which is where all of Microsoft's short URLs are, aka.ms/desktop bridge signup. Desktop bridge signup. All no spaces or anything like that. All right, so that'll take us to the form that you're talking about. That'll start the wheels rolling to vet us. So if I just want to check a box and I have full trust access, that's not the way it works. I have to be vetted first.
Yeah. So what happens next is that one of our engineers reaches out to you and basically helps you through the process of testing, certifying, and submitting your application. So, okay. So it's a pretty nice process, and you'll get to meet some nice folks here at Microsoft.
That's right. All the app console guys, maybe the friendliest we've ever hired.
Exactly, great guys.
Let me ask you about that. Oh, go ahead, Unni.
Because hear about this from customers quite often. That's all assuming you wanted your app to be available in our store. Step 1, if you just wanted to make it available in Jerry Nixon's incorporated firm, you don't need to do anything. You can just download Visual Studio, convert your app, and give it to all your employees. That's just fine,
Okay, so that's a great clarification. If all I want to do is sideload this through GPO or some sort of thing I've got internally,
ECU, or whatever mechanism that you have managed your enterprise, power to you.
Okay. All right, that's actually a great story, because there are going to be a lot of companies who are like, now wait just a second. The last thing I want to do is talk to a human. So, all right, fine. What about the other kind of businesses? What if I do want to put my application through the store, but I want to put it through the Windows Store for business that'll isolate it only to my company? Do I still need to go through this vetting process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the onboarding process to the Windows Store for Business is in essence very similar to the consumer store in terms of the mechanics, but some different set of policies is being applied there. So that is more tailored towards the enterprise scenario.
Yeah. Now, one special thing a UWP application cannot do, but a desktop bridge can do, is run its startup. And a lot of desktop applications have this as a requirement because they're monitoring for something, waiting for a message or something. Think about Slack. If Slack didn't load every time you started Windows, but you had to remember to go load it up, I would go crazy. He wouldn't be bragging about Slack. He'd be complaining about Slack.
Yeah, that's a good question. And clearly that was one of the first requirements that we realized when we looked at some of the apps that are good candidates for the desktop bridge. And so that's a feature that was included from day one in the anniversary update. So you can declare in the AppX manifest, hey, this is a process from my package that I need to run whenever the user logs on, and then we'll load up that process for you. And so we're now actively working on extending that feature also to UWP in the fall creator update. Actually.
Nice, Brett. Very nice. Every UWP developer just did a backflip when you said that. That is awesome. Awesome.
So I'll readily admit that the first thing I do after I install Office, for example, is to turn off Skype from starting by itself. Yeah. So
right.
I like to be in control of what's running, so that I can, essentially work in privacy or in a private mode without online and things like that. But that said, I totally understand that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Unni. And this goes back to kind of the Win32 app model versus the UWP app model, where in the Win32 world, any app could just put itself into the list of startup tasks, and it would get launched, and the user has never intended that to be the case, and the user is not really in control. The way we're designing it for UWP is actually we have the goal to solve this kind of problem. So the way it will work is, even if you declare yourself as a startup app, the user first needs to launch your app at least once. Then the app can call an API to request being added to the startup list. And that will trigger a one-time user consent dialog. So in your case, Unni, you could say, oh, Skype for Business, no, I don't want to allow you, and then it will be done. But if you allow it, then you get the benefits, and then later you can also go into the settings and change them.
Now, Stefan, I want to make sure we're talking about the desktop bridge and not UWP, but since we're talking about this, I can't help it. If I use let's say if I use a startup background task as the first thing that executes after installation for my UWP application, can that call that same API and add me to the startup list, or do I need to wait for the foreground application to launch?
Yeah, so that one requirement for that API is that your app is actually in the foreground.
Okay, so no prefetch either. It's you got to wait till you're actually running.
The user actually has to run your foreground application, and then the app can ask for the permission.
Okay, all right, I get it. I was just kind of wondering, how I can actually make this sucker work. I like that. I like that a lot. If my app's not good enough that a user can't run it one time, then maybe it doesn't deserve to be running at startup. And how many Win32 applications add themselves to start? It just like pulls my hair out, right? Because I'll install Chrome, and now the Chrome updater has to install, and I'll install Reader from Adobe, and the updater has to install, Java has to. I have all these things in my tray. I click, expand, it goes all the way across the taskbar now, and because every single one of them is an updater looking to see if is iTunes up to date or not, and all these things drive me crazy. All of those get erased. The desktop bridge doesn't just make it easier for a developer or for an IT pro because of easy uninstallation. The user really is going to have a real advantage to this because of, if nothing else, just this upgrade scenario where the store is the one thing that's always running, looking, and upgrading applications as long as you install them from the store.
Yeah, and you don't want all these apps to use up all your CPU, use up all your memory, use up your battery all the time, right? I mean, that's not a good user experience. So with all these changes in UWP, we're not only making apps better, we're making the whole system experience better.
Okay, I've used the desktop app converter just like we talked about. I've downloaded it off the store. I've downloaded the Windows image file, which is this gigantic 4 gigabyte file that is somehow required for conversion. What's the purpose of this enormous file?
So that file facilitates the isolated environment that we need in order to kind of run your installer like one last time in a completely clean environment with no external changes.
Okay.
So we can precisely record all the registry changes, all the file system changes that your installer does, so that we can then accurately create a Windows app package that declaratively does all the exact same things.
Okay, so you just need to execute it inside an environment, inside a virtual environment you're going to create using the WIM file, and that's one of the reasons when I read the documentation and it says must be using Windows 10 Professional. One of the reasons is because this is actually Hyper-V that's running.
It's kind of a VM, yeah.
Okay.
So it's like an instance of Windows that is isolated from the rest. Yep.
Okay. So what if I don't have? I want to back up just to the idea of Hyper-V. If I don't have Hyper-V running, is that okay? Is it running something else, or I need to have my BIOS enabled for Hyper-V to use the Win?
I think you do. So I mean, check on MSDN. There are the exact requirements there. I think you need to run on the Pro SKU of Windows 10, and then have certain things enabled that I don't all remember from the top of my head.
That's okay. It needs to match the computer that I'm running it on, obviously, right? Because I want everything to match, and it's a requirement. And once I go through the converter, step 2, I guess we're on now, I've run through the converter. It's used this image file to be able to really see everything my installer is doing. It's recorded all that, taken all those, created my initial registry hive, created my initial virtual file system, packaged all that and my executable inside an AppX. In many cases, that AppX is ready to go because the desktop converter has also done really cool things, like gone into my exe, found all my icons, pulled them out, reformatted all my images, and dropped them in my assets. Maybe it's done a great job of that. Maybe I'm very particular and it's a little too, it missed something or whatever, and I want to go in and fix it. But in many cases, we're in step 2. Step 3 is submit to the store.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you are definitely ready for testing now. So that part is important. After the conversion, you want to make sure you test your application thoroughly. Even though we didn't change any of your code, as you've learned, we are making some modifications at runtime in terms of redirecting your writes to files and registry. So just to make sure you didn't have any sort of wrong assumptions or bad assumptions in your code that are no longer true after the conversion, it is very important that you do kind of a thorough test pass. And also
part of that test pass would be to run the Windows Application Certification Kit, right? It will do a pretty thorough test pass, and just turns out maybe I do need to make just a change or two to my calculator, and it's identified something or a missing asset or just it'll tell me what it all is. That's the same certification kit that the team in the store uses too. So it gives me a quick peek into the future of what they'll be interrogating my application with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, with the Creators Update SDK, the WAC tool now supports Desktop Bridge applications. So this is something new for those folks who have started earlier, like before Creators Update. They didn't have that luxury. But now, you can run all those tests yourself before you go through the submission.
All right, let's talk about the in-between step. Before, the WAC has identified, WAC Windows Application Certification Kit has identified there's something I need to change. And so here's what I do. I rename that AppX to .zip, unzip the whole thing into a folder like I would want, and I go in and I'm like, oh, I need to delete my uninstall.exe, or I need to, whatever it is. I need to go in and do my whatever little thing that's special for my application. Then the next step isn't to run the DAC anymore, right? The DAC is actually done, and I may never rerun the desktop application kit or converter again. I may only run now its kind of sibling friend called MakeAppx. And what's special about MakeAppx?
Yeah, that's a good point. The desktop app converter you really only run once in order to create the structure of your package and the package itself. But now from here on out, any modifications you do, whether it's updating your visual assets or making some code changes or making content changes, those will go directly into the AppX layout. And then once you've made any change, you can create a new AppX package by using the MakeAppx tool that comes with.
So what I can't do is rezip that folder into a zip file and rename that zip file into a .appx, right? There are hashes and CRCs that are just needed to be created. Yep. That's what MakeAppx does. And the great news about MakeAppx is, one, it doesn't use that image file. You're done with the image file. So the second thing that's great about it is it's all command line. So now I can start integrating it into my automated build process. It's MakeAppx that I want to drop in my new exe, and then I want to make a new Appx out of it, and I can do the whole thing through command line. Don't have to worry about that 4 gig file or anything like that. It's nice, quick, and has it together. Now, the one thing that's special and has always been true is if I want to run a UWP application or install, it must be signed. And so I can add a signature cert to my AppX so that I can sideload it locally or sideload it into my employees or whatever, and it will execute. But if I'm going to, which is an important part, when you look at the docs, it's always sign, 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 sign. But I think it's important that developers understand that signature, that certificate that you're wanting to use, is not necessary for once it goes to the store, because even if I've signed it, it will be unsigned in a sense and then re-signed with a certificate that the store owns that is already trusted by all Windows 10 users. Your application, a lot of open source developers have that little donate button on their website, and really all they're trying to do is raise the $400 a year so they can buy their app cert so that they can be a trusted application that's installed. All of that is a free gift from Microsoft to you that you no longer need to have that app cert because it comes free with the store. It's pretty sweet. It's really sweet, actually.
Yeah, those are very good points. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I'm not stopping there, Stefan. There's more. It's unbelievable. I send it up to the store. Here's the next thing as an open source developer. I have to rely on crazy sites like download.com because honestly, I can't afford the traffic. I have a very popular application, and the ingress-egress cost is just too much for me, right? Maybe I'm not open source. Maybe I'm a company with a very, very popular app, and I'm like, wow, we are spending tons of money just to deliver these bits over to people who may or may not use it. But all of that ingress and egress from and to the store, I never even see that. That's yet another serious gift from Microsoft that I don't have to worry about. And more importantly, it's not just a server with an endpoint out there. It's a CDN across the globe that delivers my application where it's not just free ingress and free egress. It's a free CDN and a free certificate trusted across all Windows 10 users. All of a sudden, this is incredible, right? This is a heck of a deal.
Let's not forget all the local payment methods around the globe that you don't need to worry about anymore.
That's another great point. That is absolutely right. Not only not only now is my application, not only is the page that allows you to download it and install it and pay for it all localized for me, right? All of that's handled by the store, right? My application is not localized. I'm the developer. I'm in charge of that. But all of the interaction when it comes to fulfillment and money is all handled there. Currency is all handled for me. And more importantly, and perhaps something that not all developers think of, the liability of dealing with people's credit cards and bank accounts. You will never touch that because the store handles all of it for you. And so your application, a lot of the nightmares that come after these great ideas that developers have, they write their software, they're ready to deliver it, they're like, what? I have to do all this other stuff? The store is like, look, just write your application. We'll handle everything from there, even if your app is free. That's what's crazy. So, I mean, I could keep going, but I don't want to. Now, one thing that's great, once I wrap this up in an AppX, I also have the ability in my Win32 application to access WinRT APIs and be able to do things with an EXE that I used to only be able to do with an AppX, right? And I can do all of a sudden magical things. And Unni, now suddenly, you've even given me a set of APIs that I can download through NuGet. A lot of developers, they're not quite sure where to find that NuGet package that I think it's just called Desktop UWP or UWP Desktop. It's one of those. Do you know which one it is? It's one of those two. And all of a sudden, there's WinRT in my calculator application, and I haven't even started writing my UWP app. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely, you can use all of the great packages that users have put out there for .NET and UWP, and you can leverage all of that code as well. The one thing I wanted to clarify in the context of the converter before we sort of move on to this topic, using the converter is mandatory, right? Like that's one workflow you kind of use if you have an installer handy, right? In some and by the way, like we have been partnering with, I don't know, 5 or 7, is that right, Stefan?
Yeah, something like that. 5, 6 partners.
Top of the guys who essentially people use to build these installers, so that we spit out the AppX package, right from their tool, right? So you don't have
tools like Install Shield and Wise and stuff like that.
That's right. So you don't have to use the converter. That's one tool in your toolbox, but you could just directly like spit out an AppX, or even let's say you're talking about that simple batch file case, you can just zip it out or create a package out of the MakeAppx tools in the SDK. In an upcoming update to Visual Studio, we'll have some tools to help you with that as well. So yeah, the whole use of the converter is one workflow. You could certainly make do with to use any one of those other things that we talked about as well.
Well, tell me a little bit about the Visual Studio experience, Unni. If I don't want command line and things like that, what kind of options do I have if I want to stay inside the IDE that I've grown to love?
Yeah, so I'll describe an experience that doesn't exist today, but will exist in the near future. There's no point like looking back, so to speak. So in an update to Visual Studio 2017, you'll be able to take your, let's say, your simple exe, your calculator.exe application package out of it, right? So you don't need a converter. You don't even need to write an MSI or anything like that. You pretty much have a project, let's say a WPF project that spits out your calculator.exe. We'll get you another project that we, let's call it like the AppX packaging project. You pretty much do your known gesture of adding a project-to-project reference, and then right-click and create store packages, and that's pretty much it, right? So with three clicks, without using convert, we'll build you an AppX package that's ready to go to the store, just like you do today for UWP apps, in Visual Studio 2017.
Nice. And if I need to make changes to my manifest in that same update, there might even be a checkbox that says run full trust.
This particular project that will help you add to your solution will have everything in it, including a pre-made manifest file. You can choose to change it if you like so. Other files are enough to help you get started testing. And then when you're ready, you can of course put in your final assets, tweak your strings, and then create packages right from Visual Studio.
Okay. That's pretty sweet. Looking forward to that. Now, let's talk about today for a second. What's the debug experience that I get in Visual Studio? How do you coach developers now that you're trying to build your companion application?
That's right. So today, the experience requires you to, we have a Visual Studio that allows you to create what we call a debugging project. What all that does is lets Visual Studio know when your intent, oh, by the way, we should take a step back. Your intent as a developer is to sort of take your code that was working perfectly fine as a .NET application and make it available, let's say, via the Windows Store, right? At the same time, you want to continue to sort of like test it as, a regular application that always, was working before. So this desktop debugging project is your intent to test it in the context of the UWP application model, or is your intent to test it in the context of your classic Windows 32 application model? So once you set up this project type, depending upon what your startup project is, if your startup project is this new project type, when you hit F5 in Visual Studio, we will deploy the application in the context of a Windows 10 application model and activate the application data.
Yeah. Now wait just a second. I'm a developer and I'm getting pretty excited about what you're talking about, Unni. So make sure I know it's called the Desktop Bridge Debugging Project. Is that what it's called?
That's right. I mean that name is going to change soon when we sort of expand its capabilities, but that's what it's called.
Okay, so that's what it is today, and if I want to download it, I get it through the extension manager, right? It's not a template I download or whatever. I go find it through the extension manager, and it adds it as a template for me.
That's right.
Okay, yeah, and I've used it, and it's remarkably straightforward.
Yep.
Okay, so now inside, that's great, by the way, because it's very difficult to debug your Win32 application in a UWP context without something like that to do it. So now my application, my calculator, I've broken out my scientific calculator to be all UWP. So I really am shipping two, and now I have this debugging project to help me bring them together and kind of doing two different windows.
The goal is that it's the exact same code base you're maintaining and testing. You're just in like two different ways, right? So your code is 100% shared. It's just packaged in a different using a different methodology.
Okay. And so let's talk about some value in the store. We talked a little bit about some things, but one of the things that every software developer that is paying or wants users to pay for their application is licensing, and the store handles licensing for me, right? Now I don't have to fiddle with, all these crazy keys and these things. And I mean, we've all come up with our own crazy mechanisms that are probably easy to break, or we've paid for licensing subsystems that we add to our application. All of that's gone. Actually makes my app, I don't know, Stefan, it's a little more lightweight because I don't have to have all of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So there's probably a lot of code that you can just delete because it's done for you by Microsoft. But not only that, it also opens up new opportunities for different models that the store provides, like for trials, and doing in-app purchases in your application using the store APIs, and then also new in the Creators Update, there is the new payment request API that you can use for kind of a checkout experience in your application. And again, basically, Microsoft
which isn't going
does all
to the
the heavy
store,
lifting.
right?
This is not going through the store. That is right. And then yet again, it's a very simple workflow for you, and you don't have to worry about all the heavy lifting that Microsoft is doing for you.
So the request payment API, it's engaging with my Microsoft account and all the payment mechanisms I've already set up there, and it's using what we used to call Microsoft Wallet, and now that API is just a simpler API for me to be able to call it. So even if I'm not using the store, I can still request payment right now, and it's still abstracted. I never see credit card numbers. I never see anything, and everything's kind of handled there. What about Cortana? Can I use Cortana in my desktop applications?
Yes, you can. So
what about,
you're converted, in a nutshell, once you have converted your Win32 app with the desktop bridge tooling, you have access to all UWP APIs, and so this includes Cortana.
What about application data? One of the things as a developer, I have to maintain this web server out there, and the reason is I let users save their settings. But I also know that UWP has its own settings API that roams from machine to machine to machine for me, even without having to set up a web server. Can I take advantage of that mechanism and bring down all my web servers?
Yep, absolutely. You have the exact same application data APIs available now in your converted Win32 app.
That's brilliant. There's so much win for a developer that is already. How about this? I need a web presence. I have to go have a website because if people, Bing or Google my app name, I want them to be able to find it. So I had to go get a website, get a domain, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't it be great if the App Store gave me a web presence instead? Well, it does. There you go. Now they can find your application there, and I don't have to maintain this secondary one, which would just point me back to the App Store anyway. So there's just a lot of little things that are it's just nice. It's just nice. What about cool stuff now, like Project Roam? Can a Win32 application shipped as an AppX take advantage of Project Roam to be able to leverage my same application on different devices?
Yeah, definitely. Again, same is true as for any other UWP features. As a converted Win32 app, you have access to all of that.
Now, my application, my calculator, I have been dying for that calculator to run on Windows Phone. Now with the desktop app, will it run on the Windows Phone?
So, no. So your Win32 code, once you package it as a Windows app package, is still a Win32 app that targets the desktop SKU of Windows 10. So in order to run on other SKUs of Windows 10, you need to complete the journey across the bridge and basically move all your code into the UWP app container. Once you've done that, then your app can deploy and run on all Windows 10 devices.
And you're going to give me the same answer when I ask you about Xbox, when I ask you about HoloLens, when I ask you about anything else. You have to complete the bridge. This is the desktop bridge meant for the Windows desktop. Since we're talking a little bit about, and one of the reasons, by the way, it won't work, and I'm sure there's more than just one, but one of them is, well, frankly, I've compiled to a specific chipset, right? I've compiled to x86 or 32, and I think that's important for me to be able to kind of understand. I have my application in two versions. I have a 64-bit and a 32-bit. Let me ask you, which one do I submit to the store?
You submit both, or you can submit both. So
Okay.
it's ultimately up to you. We recommend you submit both, and
Okay.
then the store will provide the appropriate one to the customer depending on the machine that they're running.
Okay, so I don't have Jerry's calculator 64-bit, Jerry's calculator 32-bit. I have just Jerry's calculator, and depending on the user and the architecture of their computer, the store decides which package they get.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty nice. Now, talk to me about localization. I've still decided not to change my EXE, but inside that EXE, when I install it, one of the things is you want English or do you want gibberish, right? And so you can pick either one. How do you handle localization like that inside the desktop bridge?
Yeah. So if your existing Win32 application uses localization mechanism from kind of the Win32 world, that would still continue to work in the exact same way as before. So we're not changing any of that, or we're not taking away anything. So things will just work the same way. However, once converted, you also have the option to use kind of the modern way of localization that we are using in the UWP world, using the MRT APIs and infrastructure in UWP. So that is a new option that is available to you as well.
Okay, so that's pretty nice. So if I do happen to force a user to pick a language and they only get one through setup, but I'm able to do that unattended, so I can still use the converter, I can create two and kind of handle it like the two architectures, and I can give both up to the store. Unni, one of the things that I like with mobile applications is being able to use HockeyApp. Of course, we've rebranded HockeyApp now to Visual Studio. Oh, I just lost it. Visual Studio Mobile Center.
Visual Studio.
Isn't that right? Mobile Center. What's the story with my Win32 application? Can I use that same sort of functionality and get benefits from it?
Yeah, so first of all, Visual Studio Mobile Center is sort of a ground-up effort. Yes, it does support scenarios that HockeyApp used to support, but we are sort of positioning that as sort of like the one place, one-stop shop for doing all of your various activities in the dev process. That could be automating betas like what HockeyApp used to do, looking at crash analytics and everything in between, right? So that's that. About HockeyApp or about Visual Studio Mobile Center, we just I believe like 10 days ago announced support for UWP apps in the Visual Studio Mobile Center. So right now the support is restricted to UWP apps, but we will soon bring other app types as well, like the desktop bridge converted app types as well. It's just it's not that far off, but right now the Mobile Center is restricted to UWP apps only.
I love talking about future things like this because it's just one of those things where you see a gap and you're like, why would that gap be there? But that's not what you should think. You should think, I see a gap, they're going to fill that gap. I mean, of course they're going to fill that gap.
That's right.
It's just one of those things.
Right. I mean, one of the reasons why it's so is, like I said, it's not just about distributing the applications. It's about writing an SDK so you can add telemetry for your application, or so it takes time for us to bring up the SDK required for the functionality as well. And it's not just about like an AppX that we distribute to users. So it's sort of like multiple steps along the way before we sort of get to the point where we can distribute that AppX itself. We'll get there soon, though.
All right. So great. Super great. And I would like to say that I would imagine that will be something wrapped around .NET Standard 2 when that day comes, and all those SDKs are there too, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we want to make sure that those SDKs are primarily write once and run everywhere, including Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, UWP, desktop, Win32 code, etc. WPF, for example. So that's absolutely true.
Another cool win. There are so many little things that we give to developers through this process that are, I mean, once you put it all together, it's crazy not to think about this as and all of its value. Like one of the things is, how nice would it be to have a dedicated human tester go through your application before it's submitted to the store? The store gives you a real person. Like it is an actual human clicking to make sure 1 + 1 really equals 2 or whatever makes sense, right? And to make sure that part is cool, but you brought it up with HockeyApp. Around telemetry, you brought it up with the Visual Studio Mobile Center with telemetry SDK. But before I go to like really deep telemetry where I can have custom events and all of this neat stuff, I get basic telemetry for free just because I'm in the store. How, which country, what are my crash reports? I can even upload my symbols so that my crash reports make sense to me and I can see lines of code. What types of users, when did they use them, how often do they procure it? I mean, it's all of this stuff. You're like, wow, how am I going to put all that in my code? Nothing. My calculator.exe still doesn't need to change. I just get that as for free. It's pretty awesome.
You pretty much define your control groups. Like, think about this as you running your experiment. Define your control group, you get them to use it, get their feedback, fix the bug immediately, and then turn around, within an hour and, get more feedback. So
yeah.
That's the goal.
Now, actually, within an hour, I'll make a change. It turns out I had a label spelled wrong. I said name, but I mistakenly said, amen. I totally spelled it almost right. I've made this tiny change. It's a 4 gigabyte exe. It's gigantic, Stefan. Now, I guess what? All my users have to download a 4 gigabyte file so they can fix one tiny thing?
Yeah, no, they don't. So yeah, thanks to differential updates, they will get like a really, really tiny update package downloaded to their system that really just fixes that block, as we call it, that contains the changed string, and then they're up and running automatically with your bug fix.
That's almost an art in itself. If you have an application today and you need to make a small change, and you make a hot fix or you make a patch or whatever technique you've decided to go across, fine. Those all work. We've proven that they work, but they are sophisticated, and you're going to have an entire schooling path just to figure out how to do that right. And most developers are like, forget it. I'll just ship the entire thing again. This is too much to figure out regardless of what a benefit is to the user. But now I'm submitting it through the desktop bridge. I get that for free. I don't have to make any. You guys interrogate my new submission as well as the one that's installed on all the users' desktops, figure out the delta between it, and hocus pocus, magic later, and all of a sudden, wow, this tiny little thing comes down, and what the developer have to do to figure all this out? Nothing at all.
Right.
Yeah, you're so nonchalant about it, Stefan, but it's incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. All right, 2 more things before we wrap up here that I want to make sure we talk about. One, .NET Core. Is my .NET Core application supported this way?
Yes.
No reason to believe why not. It is Xcopy deployable. Yeah, there we go. So looks like Stefan has tried it. It's Xcopy deployable, so why not?
Yeah, that's right. And that's the one kind of scenario I hadn't thought of asking up until just now. And the last thing I wanted to ask is around Windows 10S. So we announced Windows 10S a couple weeks ago, and the S stands for Desktop Bridge. It doesn't stand for that, but if I want my calculator running on Windows and the user is running Windows 10S, can my calculator be deployed onto Windows 10S through the bridge?
Yes, that's correct. So Windows 10S will only support apps deployed from the Windows Store, and so this includes both UWP apps as well as desktop bridge applications.
Yeah. And anybody listening who doesn't understand the strategic value of Windows 10s, I think it'd be easy to say, oh, Windows 10s? Are you kidding? Who's going to run that? Well, let's talk in a year, because all of a sudden we're behind it, and all of a sudden schools are behind it, and all of these things are happening because it's a very affordable version of Visual Studio, very affordable version of Windows, and it's very safe and secure, has all these nice mechanisms around it. Kind of goes back to the dream we had, the big dream we had with Windows RT, where we were like, look, we can lock it all down, only now we can lock it all down and we can support your Win32 apps, which of course was a limitation back in those days, thanks to the bridge and all the things we can do around there as well. I think it's a big win. I mean, you're just going to miss the opportunity, and why? Because what's the pain point around a desktop bridge? I guess you're just going to have all these capabilities for free. Or I guess you're just going to have to run this quick little utility that just spits it out on the other side, and now it's ready to go. And I can put this automated through my existing build process, and I don't have to change all these mechanisms at all. Everything still flows the same. Almost no code change. Many times it's removing code, right? I'm taking away that upgrade thing. I'm taking away that system tray thing that I've got there, and pieces like that are right. And for the 99% of Win32 apps that qualify, right, there is that 1% that do these special things. But for all the others, man, this is a no-brainer. And I think we're starting to see it's starting to pick up now. I mean, Unni, you said you're using Slack out of the store. I've just installed our internal version of Skype for Business, so we know that's coming. We just announced Office 2016 is going to be available in the store so that they can have that on their Windows 10s. What are some other apps that you guys have seen adopting the desktop bridge?
Well, one of the big announcements that we just made at the Build conference was iTunes. So iTunes is coming to the Windows Store. I think that's a great app to have on the platform.
Yeah.
Evernote was one of our early adopters that we talked about it at Build 2016. Actually, we remember we converted it on stage live. There was no black magic or anything. We actually converted the real Evernote live on stage, and now they've been in the store for a couple of months. Kodi is another great example. They are very popular and successful with their Windows Store version.
I saw where Inkscape is now in the store. Right, a lot of people like that for SVG editing. Flux is now in the store, which I've used for years and years. So capable. And then what's another cool one? Fiddler is almost in the store, right? Because I'm working with that team to get them into the store. What were you going to say, Unni?
I was saying Telegram. It's used to send like encrypted messages. I think that's a if I'm not mistaken, that's a desktop bridge app.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what we're not mentioning now is those 32-bit applications where they're internal, right? And my enterprise is ready to use it and move it in as well, because I mean, it's the chicken before the egg. And in this case, I needed Windows 10 on my desktop before I could really start thinking about the store. You already sold me about this, sold me with the store a year ago, right? It was incredible what the store could do, and now look at it, even better. But internally in my enterprise, I didn't have that option until just now. My admins have started rolling out the desktop Windows 10 upgrades, and so that's a big deal. Now suddenly I can start really thinking about this as a real solution. I can convert it. I can start doing the testing, start investing into the Windows Store for Business as well. So where we might, start mentioning things like, Fiddler and Slack and Office, those are all big deal and those are important. But at the same time, we have these internal ones that maybe they're invisible to us, but they're there, especially now that they're being unlocked by desktop migrations that are kind of inevitable, right? Because Windows 10 is now starting to see its adoption, starting to spike inside the enterprise that wasn't there before. It's pretty great, and no extra pieces for them either. And it's just kind of a win for everybody around. I'm proud of my calculator exe. I love the fact that the process can be, it's just a batch file, double click, it's all automated for me. I get it all set up, I'm ready to go. And now I can even use the APIs to submit it into the store. If I don't even want to go into the developer portal and interact with it through the web, I can automate everything all the way across, and now it's in the store with free telemetry and testing and CDN and signatures and all the things that come free just because I'm using the store. And, especially enterprises, they just spent $6 million writing this line of business app. It took them 3 years and 1 million developers, it seems like. The last thing they want is for Microsoft to say, go rewrite this whole thing as a UWP. That's the last thing we would ever say to them as well. That's not our message, right? Our message is great. Good job. We love WPF too. You've just done what we would have done if we were in your place. Now we're just giving you a bridge or a path into the store. Stefan, I have to say, what's the future of the bridge? What else could you possibly add to it?
It's a great question. I think there's still some work for us left on the tooling space, working with Unni's team, make some of the processes a little smoother for developers. And then another big one for us is continuing the API expansion of UWP to make it easier for those existing developers to move their code into the UWP app container. And so we talked about that at Build 2017 quite a bit, about what we're doing in the fall creators update. Aligning UWP to .NET Standard 2.0 is a big one. We also talked about supporting modern UI in Win32 processes, which will enable developers to move more gradually within their current UI, adopt some of the new concepts, and then move over into the UWP app container. So there's some pretty good investment areas that we're tackling for fall and
yeah. Unni, I have to say, if I was a developer listening to this, one thing would come to mind. Look, there are some things I totally get about UWP, right? I mean, it's around performance, around memory consumption, all the new controls that are being introduced, around all the innovation that's being added to WinRT. But at the same time, I look at the bridge, and the one thing I can't help but ask is, why would I write it as a UWP then? What do you tell developers who ask that question?
I mean, the in terms of Windows and capabilities, forget about APIs, like the capabilities of the platform, the operating system, the hardware innovations, that's primarily all going to happen in the UWP space. And that's like really like it's sort of setting you up for the unknown, like all the stuff that's going to happen in the future in terms of input and graphics and all of that stuff. Like you're setting us up or setting yourself up for leveraging,
Yeah, even the new design language.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, like you said at the very beginning, like, WPF is just fine, and we'll continue to make it easier, even for WPF apps, to call into as many of these APIs as possible. But there's a limit to, like, what you could put in, practically do in that space. And so beyond there, if you're starting from scratch, I mean, absolutely, like, you should absolutely consider, like, writing UWP app.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. In fact, I think it pays to look where the innovation is. Like, where is Microsoft really investing for its innovation? I mean, it makes sense to recognize, look, Windows is slowly being written as UWP XAML, right? And Office is UWP XAML when you look at it on mobile. And when you look at all of these investments that we have, we are slowly investing so deeply in Windows UWP XAML. And then you're like, well, why would I do it as UWP? Well, maybe because you could step back and say, wow, strategically, all of Microsoft is investing at an unbelievable rate inside UWP. Maybe I want to be part of the future instead of part of what's awesome today. I want to be part of what's awesome tomorrow as well. And so, right, well, how do I bridge these two worlds? Well, we've written the desktop bridge for you. It's going to be easier than you think. And it is pretty nice because I can my WPF app, which never even thought about Windows 10 until today, all of a sudden can start using these WinRT APIs and feel a little bit more like it belongs in Windows 10. And as I go forward and I'm like, wow, I really want to take advantage of these UI innovations and all these controls that just aren't available to me inside WPF, that's an easy migration path for me then, because I've been able to do it very, very slowly.
That's right. And the work we're doing with .NET Standard and things like that, we want to make sure that it's easy for you to not just move your code, but share your code as well. So, even if you made a decision that, you wanted to sort of change tomorrow, that's fine. Like, I mean, there should not be buyer's remorse. You essentially can reuse all of that code. So, there is nothing wrong.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's one of our phrases we use where Microsoft, respects your investment. but it's totally legit. And if there's anything that proves it, it's the desktop bridge. All right, Stefan, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a big fan of the desktop bridge.
That's awesome.
I like all the work that your team has done. Thanks for being on the show and kind of talking us through some of the nitty-gritty that I think unlocks a lot of the mental blocks that may be there for developers.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Unni, it's another great show. You're doing great work. Thanks to both of you. We'll talk to you guys again.